Thank you. This is so much fun. This is my first time coming to the Union Liner like this. I really wanted to do it. I retired essentially 3 years ago, and it was a wonderful career. I was an aircraft tech for United Airlines. My grandfather hired on in 1928, as Sarah said. He actually was wooed by Jimmy Doolittle. After World War I in 1925, he was barnstorming in Plymouth, Indiana, and he was out there. My grandfather and his older brother were truck mechanics at a dairy and went out to see Jimmy Doolittle, and he was having problems with his airplane. His mechanic was having a difficult time. And my grandfather and his older brother figured it out and got it running, and they told him, he said to my grandfather and my great uncle that you should go to Chicago, and there's a new industry starting up, airmail, and we need good mechanics. So from then on it started, my great uncle and then my grandfather. And in 1940, my grandfather and his three brothers worked at 4 different airlines at Municipal Airport, Midway. One was American, United, Braniff, and Chicago Southern. But it just runs deep in my family, and that's where I am. I love it. My son loves it, and once it gets in your blood, I think everybody knows. And I grew up in it, which was really bad. Listening to my grandfather, my dad, and my uncle who worked for the original Frontier, that all the fun stuff that you would hear in all these stories. So I'm going to start with the history of United Airlines, and we'll go all the way back to the beginning of airmail. Airmail was flown by the post office from coast to coast, and it was not very profitable, but they were making money on it. And it was very difficult for the post office to start flying mail from coast to coast, and they knew that they needed to get out of it, so they wanted to commercialize the airmail service. So they put it out for bid, all these routes, and a lot of them were started with feeder routes. So Walter Varney, right there, Varney Airlines, had the first commercial airmail route up and running April 6, 1926. So that's what's considered the first commercial airline, because it was commercial airmail. And he had it from Pasco, Washington, down through Boise, down to Echo, Nevada. And he had the first route. It was very profitable. The only reason he got that route was no one else bid on it. So it was very profitable. And he started with that. So later on, National Air Transport over here was out of Chicago. That's who my grandfather hired on with. But in 1925, Ford had their own airline, which was Stout Airlines and Ford, and they were flying mainly their own executives and people around in parts. But that's what brought up. Stout was the original manufacturer of the Ford Tri-Motor, and Ford had bought Stout. So the business people in Chicago got together and started National Air Transport from Stout. And they had the routes from Chicago, east and north and south, up into Michigan, down to Dallas. So after that, then Boeing ended up with the route from the West Coast, San Francisco, or essentially Oakland, because San Francisco didn't have an airport yet. And Boeing Air Transport over here was, like I said, from the West Coast all the way to Chicago. And then Pacific Air Transport, right below, had the routes up and down the Pacific, from San Diego all the way up to Seattle. All 4 had a working agreement in 1927, and it became the first airline working agreement that became the first transcontinental airline. And when they merged, by 1930, the whole merger was done. This is a little bit off. My graphics guy had it off by 1 year. But the merger of all 4 airlines came about to become United Airlines. There also were a couple other things that merged into it. Boeing Aircraft Manufacturing, Pratt & Whitney, and Hamilton Standard. So I think a lot of people I think you've heard of United Technologies. That is what formed United Technologies. In 1935, it was a monopoly and the government broke it up. They said you can't build your own aircraft and have the 247, which was the first all-metal low-wing airplane, and they had the first 60, which also changed things in the aviation world, that when you order an airplane, you can't get the first round of it. It's got to be a mix so everyone has an asset to it. So they broke that up. Bill Boeing ended up leaving Boeing Manufacturing and went to United Airlines and was president of United Airlines. So United Airlines was formed, and in 1934, you could see, there it is. 1934, you could see the route structure that United had. United had the best route structure, and they called it the main line. The main line also followed the railroad from coast to coast. It also followed something else in the west, the Oregon Trail. And if you look at the route structure of that, that's where the Oregon Trail broke up and went north and south on the Pacific end. But we had the main line. We have our company store is called the Mainliner. If many people know about it, they don't know why it's a Mainliner. We used to name our aircraft back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s Mainliners. And that's where that name came from. So all the way down, kind of hard to find it. There it is. So all the way down, I'll step over here, maybe a little easier. United Airlines, there were 4 airlines all the way up until Capital Airlines. That was during regulation. United Airlines couldn't get a route on the East Coast to save their soul because they said they're the largest airline. And we're not going to give it. We're going to give all those routes to other airlines. Well, they merged with Capital Airlines. Capital Airlines at the time was having financial dire straits because they had bought and invested in the Viscounts and had 64 Viscounts, and they owed the British government quite a bit, and they were not able to compete with the new jet age, and that was their jet age. So United and Capital ended up merging in 1961. They turned back a number of the Viscounts back to the British Corporation, British Aerospace, and British Aerospace, they ended up going back and leasing almost all of them back because it was a very successful aircraft on short routes prior to the 737 or 727. So all the way down to Capital Airlines, which was actually Pennsylvania airline. It started in Pennsylvania and they moved to Capital, which was in Washington, D.C. And that's why they became Capital Airlines. They had an overhaul base at Reagan, or at National Airport, up until about 1964. And when they moved, everything went, after the merger, to San Francisco. So that's United Airlines, the shuttles, the TED, all of those were experiments of trying to bring up a low-cost airline. And everybody knows every airline tried to do that, but did it last? Most of them did not. So we go all the way back up here to Walter Varney. And Walter Varney, after this merger, Walter Varney ended up getting another commercial airmail route. And it was out of Pueblo, Colorado, down to El Paso. And he flew that for quite a while. It expanded. He ended up getting the route up to Denver through Wyoming Air Service. And he got it up there and he was flying into Denver. Interesting enough, United Airlines got the route out of Cheyenne down to Denver. That's how they got their route down to Denver. So they split it up. So Walter Varney had it going, but after a few years he was done flying. He went back to his original, which was a pilot training school. which was in Oakland, California. And the investors in Varney Speed Lines they went out and found a new investment and found a new CEO. His name was Robert Six. Does anybody know Robert Six? Okay, Robert Six, a rancher out of Colorado, comes up here, and he, 1934, they changed the name to Continental Airlines. So one thing that I'm talking about is Walter Varney had his fingers in starting both airlines all the way down to 2010. And in 2010, there were 3 airlines that merged. Does anybody else know the 3rd airline? No. That was already Continental. It's Air Micronesia. Air Micronesia was a separate airline, except for Continental supplied the aircraft and the crews. So Micronesia, that was 2010. Full circle, come around. When we get to this point over here, you see the Frontier, the original Frontier, 1950. Actually, I started my career with Frontier in 1979. And I didn't want to work for a big airline called United. My dad was working for it, and it's huge. They had 25,000 aircraft, or people, and 250 aircraft. Frontier was nice. We had 70 aircraft and 5,000 employees. I enjoyed it, but I could see the handwriting on the wall, and I left in 1984, and a year and a half later, they closed the doors. So that's Frontier. And then we come over here, and we'll look at, there it is. Look at Texas International. Texas International. By the time, everybody knows about Lorenzo, how he took over. No one really thinks that he's highly sought as a very upstanding individual, because he took that airline over without any assets. And he was able to get control of that. And then he was able to get on the board of Continental Airlines, took over Continental Airlines, 1981. And that was not a good situation, but Continental. So Continental, Texas International and Continental merged. And then in 1985, it was actually 85, when when Frontier collapsed, he ended up taking all the assets and the personnel. But that happened because People's Express had bought Frontier. Frontier was sold prior to that, when People's Express bought it from RKO General. And they essentially, my personal feeling is, they took the assets to run their airline. But that's what happened to Frontier. A lot of people were able to retain a decent job with Continental. Then we have New York Air, and we have People's Express. They merged. We have Eastern in here. What did Frank Lorenzo do to Eastern? Went in there, got on the board. Airline wasn't making money. He took the assets. He took the assets of the Airbus 300s, and he took their computer reservation system, because he didn't have one. So but I think every airline has gone through that. Northwest with Chi-Chi, TWA with Icon. United had the Constant brothers, but they never took charge of United Airlines. They were just on the board, and they made United Airlines sell their assets that they had, so they could pay big dividends to all their stockholders. So all the way down through all these airlines, all of them have made up United Airlines in one way or another. There's a couple that are missing. Rocky Mountain Airlines, if everybody knows about that one. It's not on this display here, but it actually was absorbed by Continental, and it was a Continental Express. But other than that, we have, that's pretty much my talking points about this thing. The other thing is, United Airlines was the first air carrier to ever have ground-to-air communication. They were the first air carrier to ever have weather radar on their whole fleet. They experimented with weather radar in the 30s with a 247. They were very innovative. And Pat Patterson, who was the president from 1933 up until 1966, worked with Robert Six. They had working agreements. They had an aircraft, a DC-7, that flew from Oklahoma City to Denver with Continental on one side, and then on the other side it said United, and the crews changed, and they flew that on up to Portland and Seattle in the 50s. But they always had a good working relationship. Robert Six could not afford radio communication, so Pat Patterson helped him out in the 30s and gave him radios to work with, or lent them to him. It was probably given to him. They were pretty close, and I think the airline industry back then, there wasn't a lot of competitiveness. They all tried to work together. Pat Patterson also, he tried to meet with every employee once a year. He knew my grandfather by his nickname of Goody, and he, up until 1947, when the airline got so big, he could not meet with him. He was such a good person that when your family had a newborn, he sent the newborn home with a receiving blanket and a dozen roses for the new mother. And I still have my receiving blanket in the box that I came home with. There are other different things that United was very instrumental with. World War II. Before World War II, Cheyenne, the maintenance center that United had, was the largest in the world for civilian aircraft. And in 1939, United started helping the British government modifying aircraft. And their aircraft that they needed modifying, they started a modification center. And I think a lot of people have heard about how when we started to come together in the late 40s and started building aircraft, and Henry Ford said, the government, every time we build an airplane, B-24 Liberator, my tongue got, my apologies. He said, it takes us too long because it's modified. Everyone is coming across different. He says, let us build the airplane and we'll start modification centers. Well, that all started with United Airlines in Cheyenne. So Cheyenne, they built some big hangars up there. Originally, they were doing tents. And they built some big hangars. United Airlines modified 5,500 B-17s in Cheyenne. Now down here in Denver, they built 2 more hangars, and Continental helped modify aircraft. B-29s, B-24s, B-17s. And if you've ever seen a picture of United Air or a Stapleton, and you see 2 Quonset long hangars, that was a modification center. And they were up until we closed the airport. But United was also very instrumental in the war effort. Most everybody know about the ball turret on the bottom of B-17. Being a tail dragger, you couldn't have, the defense was poor. United Airlines designed, engineered, built, and installed the ball turrets. They were so innovative at that time. They had an engineering crew that was amazing. United Airlines up through the 60s, into the 80s, into the 90s, modified aircraft for many people in San Francisco. Now, as everybody knows, most people don't overhaul their own aircraft anymore, but United used to overhaul aircraft for everyone. I remember one time I was in San Francisco, and here was a People's Express 747 sitting out on the ramp with all 4 engines removed. People's Express couldn't afford to pay to have that overhaul done. So United parked it over there, took the engines off it, and put them on our 747s and flew them around until they came up with the money. Then we put the engines back on, and People's Express took over the airport. Does anybody know about flame spraying, what that is? So on turbine blades of jet engine, you can look at it and they'll start eroding. United Airlines developed what's called flame spray, and it was a hot argon metal gas that was blown on to the old turbine blades and then remachined. That's done today all over the world. United developed that. So I wish we were back doing those developments, but now we're just flying passengers and cargo today. And I don't know how much time do I have? 10, 15 minutes? Other than that, what can I tell you about the history? There is a lot of history. I could, if I had my display, which I have over there, I could go on and talk about. But questions? Yes. You know, there were, yes, in both cases, when we merged, pretty much United's management went away. Because they were looking for a merger. Continental kind of took over, we took over all of, or they took over the system of both airlines running. United Airlines computer system, we started going with Continentals, and I can go on about that system because I worked with it, because we had a great system and then we went 30 years backwards for our maintenance system. It was kind of hard. United was the first airline to ever have an electronic logbook, and they started doing that in the 1980s. Started to work that way. FAA didn't want it. They wanted handwritten, and we started putting it into a computer system. But they decided to go with that logo. I think it was a better looking logo, if you want to know the truth. I still think it's a good looking logo from the last logo that we had, the last few. I miss our old tulip, but the original tulip. The blue was nice too. When we had the gray paint job, we used to call that the gray decay. And that's when, from that paint job, we went into, that's when we went into bankruptcy. It was. But another talking point, United Airlines started reservation system computerized in 1955. When I hired on with United Airlines in 1984, United Airlines computer system mainframe was the second largest in the world. The U.S. government's was larger. And it's still, that mainframe system is still being used today by many different air carriers. And a majority of the Apollo system, which was the reservations, is still located here in Denver. It's in the tech center. There's a building out there that is secured with metal fence all the way around it and barbed wire, and that's why our training center over here has an iron fence around it. That's why we just can't walk into it. We've got to have a invitation. Someone has to sponsor you, and that's why our museum is not open. We are planning on trying to have a true brick and mortar museum. Speculations, there's no room in Chicago to put it. So speculations, it may be here in Denver. So it would be a nice place to have it because we have more property around our airport and have a tool. The first 777 was retired by United, and mainly because of the engines. They're just the fan blade problem they've had. They need fan blades. They're not manufacturing them anymore. So they retired that one. That airplane is not going to scrap. It is being retained for our museum whenever we have it. Yes, it did. Mm-hmm. Right. There was still a lot of cooperation. It was in the backside. People didn't see it. Being in the maintenance end, I would be out working on an aircraft someplace, Salt Lake, and I needed a tube of sealant. Go over to Delta and say, oh yeah, here, we're not gonna charge you. Here. The mechanics always work together. Wherever we were, I'd be in the station, find something, or they'd be come to Denver. And we go, what it takes to get those parts and how much it costs to get someone to approve that cost, and whatever. If it was minute, it was an expendable, we usually gave it to each other. Now the parts, we still did do parts. When Stapleton opened, when DIA opened, we were, United Airlines was an on-call maintenance for Northwest, American, Delta, TWA, and US Air. And all those air carriers were on the C concourse at that time. And there were times that I would be over there all night or all day working on someone else's airplane. And a couple times I went on TWA, they actually, I don't remember what the part was, but they needed something. And they go, well, we're going to have to ship it to you. And I called their controller and said, hey, American's got it. They go, who? Yeah, just call it American. We go down to American, they have the parts in their inventory, and they get it going, and I put it on their MD-80 because we didn't have MD-80s. But those are fun times. A career in aviation, especially in maintenance. I retired as aircraft tech. I was taxi run on the whole fleet. I started my first taxi run on a DC-8. And let me tell you, when you take a 777 out and do a high power run on the end of a threshold, because you can't do it on a run pad, you set the brakes, you take one engine up to 80%, the other one to take off. It's a great thing that you have an event button, so you can read what happened while you were doing that high power run. Because that airplane just shakes and moves and... Yes, sir. Oh! Oh, my vintage. So this is 60s. This is a 1960s shop coat. And in San Francisco, if anybody ever been to San Francisco and saw the size of our maintenance facility back there, we overhauled every component. So this was a shop coat that they could wear. United didn't supply people with uniforms at San Francisco. Only the line people that were in the public view. So they would wear these to keep their own clothes clean. They could buy them. So this is part of my inventory that I have. I've got 2 big storage units full of a lot of equipment. I have other things coming, hopefully. But I'm very lucky to be involved with this. This has been retired. Now I'm retired doing a full-time job again. So I spend a lot of time giving tours. I spend a lot of time working with people in donations. We work all off of donations for the United Airlines Historical Foundation. I don't know if everyone knows, United Airlines was the first one to ever have stewardesses. United Airlines stewardesses, it was an experiment. Because in the airline industry, Pan Am and Lufthansa were having stewards. And the stewards were usually affiliated similar to what there was on the trains and ships, and they were young Filipino men. And United started toying with this because in flight, especially on the Boeing 80A, which was 14 passengers, the first officer had to get up and serve the coffee and the meals that were on there. So there was a station manager in Oakland in 1930 that he decided, you know, I'm going to play with the idea, and he proposed it to the company. He said, I want to try an experiment. I would like to hire women under the age of 26, not married, under 110 pounds, and a registered nurse. So the first 8 were a registered nurse that stayed with the airline all the way up into the 40s. They changed the age requirement, kept creeping up. One of the last things to go was weight requirements, and and that actually trended up a little bit. And before that was marriage. But the first 8 were United Airlines stewardesses, not flight attendants, stewardesses. Any other questions about? Yes, there was a point that they were doing. And they're trying it. They're always experimenting. Things are always changing. I don't know if you know, Denver is United's largest hub, with over 1,000 flights between United and United Express out of Denver. And it's still growing. Any other questions or comments? Or yes, sir. So yes, they own somewhere between 60 and 100 acres out there. I'm not exactly sure, and it's right off of Pena Boulevard as you're heading north and right before you make the turn to go east. They own property out there. It's the only property they own. What has happened was this training center over here, which is the largest flight training center in the world, has run out of space. And they need, with the expansion of the fleet, they need more room, and they're going to build a new training center, additional training center. This one will not close. We'll keep this one. They just added 24 new simulators, 12 full motion and 12 fixed. Any other? Well, thank you.